do not labor for the bread that perishes. The other day, I was talking to an 18-year-old student who is in Trinity College, Dublin, and she was in the throes of preparation for exams, what she would refer to as progressive guillotining. And she was explaining that no matter how well one scores at each individual exam, it's only the final exam that counts in the end. And I thought, and I even said, there is sermon matter there, because actually it's a microcosm of the whole of life. Look at the energy that people give to getting high marks or many goals on the Gaelic football field. It's the same dynamic at work. People expending huge quantities of time and energy to score well. And then, when it comes to death, how do they score? Do they score at all? The other day, I was talking to a young mother, and she was very concerned about a different kind of scoring. And it's something which is more insidious than one might perhaps think. She was referring to a problem that she had amongst her children in this family of hers, which was of deep, deep faith. The question of how they were playing and scoring, but not any more natural goals, not natural games at all, but all electronic and computerized. It's not just a question of scoring against a machine. They are actually playing against friends now on internet. And moreover, the whole campus of playing artificially is not just neutral territory. There is a psychological operation taking place which works even in nature. If you have an animal and coax him with every so often, if he does an operation, he will be rewarded, he will come back to that operation until the reward comes again. Psychologically, it's the same principle at work in computerized games or gambling. If one every so often wins, one is bit by bit psychologically conditioned to come back until one wins again. It's actually profoundly dangerous in gambling. But it's there also in computerized games, in such a way, and it's very well thought out, once one starts playing a game, one can't stop. Now, do you see what's going on? It's not one child, it's not two children, but it's the youth of today who are losing study time and being damaged psychologically by heavy bombardment of the senses and the psyche. It's profoundly damaging when it comes then to being calm with just an open book. They cannot sit still. The same applies to the effect it has on their prayer and interior life in general. They are in a state of all the time. It's not a good state to be in with a study book or prayer. But there's a third element, and it's this. Look carefully at what games they are playing and what images they are seeing. They are seeing, more than not, ugly faces, suggestions, more than not, of the ugly with a capital U, the demon. Strange faces to which they are so used that by now that is their norm. Complete reversal. Look at Halloween. Is it not the same? But there is more. These games are violent. They are all to do with thumping, clobbering, bashing, shooting, and in some way having a victory. That is demonic. That's all the devil is doing, either directly or through someone else. So they are playing with things which are of infernal dimensions and conditionings. That is subtly everywhere and very, very dangerous. And when occasionally one comes across a child, actually a good example is this family here, who have not access to them, one sees immediately how different it is. Because the child, by nature, is still angelic, has come from the womb of the Blessed Trinity, and until contaminated remains that way inclined. With regard, therefore, to the effect all this has, it obviously takes such an amount of psychological energy, first in the growing child, adolescent, and then, as time goes on, young person, because the thing becomes not better but worse, that all the preparation for the one thing that matters has been sucked in to the immediate, which for the time that it is there is important. I will win this game, I will get this exam, I will win this goal, and it's more important than going to church on a Sunday. I will be a good sportsman, and so on it goes, whatever may be the pastime. That is the essence. So life goes on and becomes even more complicated as time goes on by big ups and downs in all the field of romance, which doesn't work and starts again at zero, and then goes up to a crescendo, an ecstasy, and down again to an inferno, and on it goes. The best years of one life in ups and downs, until eventually life finishes and one has all the time been sucked into the immediate and drops into the grave, worn out and never really faced the one issue that mattered, and not prepared for that final exam which that little girl saw to be important. And the Lord puts it this way: labour for the bread that does not perish. The bread that does not perish. Our Lady is linked with the bread that does not perish. This group is dedicated to Our Lady and dedicated to intercession for priests. It's all one mystery. The other day, I was given this at the end of a retreat I was preaching in Italy to Cistercians. A monk wanted me to take this back with me to the Hermitage because it was particularly beautiful and particularly meaningful. It is an icon, but you will notice that it is not an entirely Eastern and Russian icon, but it's not either an entirely Western or French icon. It's a halfway icon, because it's not entirely stylized, and yet it's not entirely natural. It is actually, and it would have to be, either somewhere like the Ukraine or Romania. It's actually the Ukraine, a bridge country, where they have a bit of both, and the influence of East and West combined. Now, can you see what it's saying? You have Our Lady there with a crowd. She is in a posture similar to a priest celebrating. But of course, Our Lady is mother of the priest and herself associated with his priesthood insofar as she at Calvary consented, and even before, and offered willingly as Queen of Martyrs the pain of her son, which she felt mentally as much as he did physically. Look at Mel Gibson's film to get the message. Now, what's going on underneath her? By the way, little people, just for you to be aware, Mitir Thiou, Mother of God. And then you've got Jesus Christos, always got that somewhere, Jesus Christ. Then you've got, over the halo, you've got on top, ho, which means the, on, omega, and n, which means the being, the one who is. On is the present participle of to be, the being one. It's from the Apocalypse. Now, that there is in Cyrillic writing. That was the alphabet invented by Cyril and Methodius, hence the name Cyrillic, which is still used in Russian iconography. Now, what's going on here is that this is portraying the motherhood of Our Blessed Lady with regard to her Son and his sacrifice and his presence. It's a profoundly deep icon. One writes an icon and one reads it by trying to see what the person is saying. Now, the person obviously is trying to say many things at once. The halo is in the form of a host, and the chalice is containing the divine infant, extending his arms, but in a form of blessing. You've got this Eastern blessing there. And he is dressed with great nobility as a king, with that regal band around his shoulder. He's embracing the whole world. Now, Our Lady, remember, gave the body and blood. St. Joseph was not involved in the paternity as such. And this, by the way, has come out in modern miracles. Two miracles in particular have demonstrated this. Lanciano has been analysed. It was analysed already in the 70s with permission, and they found a problem there. I'll come back to it in a minute. Another miracle in Argentina has recently been analysed, and without knowing it, they have found the same problem. They sent off the samples of the miracle, because you know what happened. The priests had a doubt about the real presence, and during Mass it was transformed visibly into flesh and blood. Still there, of course. Now, they found that in the case of, now this is the one that they found recently in Argentina, it was perfect. It was from a muscle of the heart. It was taken from a person either still alive or just dead. And that's why when they looked at this, because they didn't know who it was given anonymously to experts, not saying where it came from. This does not make sense. How can I be examining this when it's still alive? And also, the blood group was that of AB, I think, a very common one in that part of the world, but not so common in this part, that is the Middle East, but not in this part. And the problem was this. There was one thing missing. There was no DNA code. And they showed this without saying where it came from. That is the same, the sample of this, they presented it to the man who's still alive, who in the 70s had analysed with permission of Lanciano. And he looked at this without knowing where it came from, and he said, "This is the same man!" Because he'd found exactly the same thing when he'd done it in the 70s. So they want now to get to the Holy Shroud of Turin and to get from there the blood samples that are actually in the cloth, and they think they'll probably find the same thing there, because it's actually proving scientifically that they're going. Now, Our Lady is therefore the one who gave the body and blood that we have at the altar. Therefore, every time that these sacred mysteries are celebrated, she feels it. She is hurt or warmed by the way that her divine Son is handled or mishandled. Some years ago, I was coming back to Ireland from Rome. It was in the summer vacation of 1994. And Ellen picked me up at the airport, and one of the first things that she said was, "We have a weeping statue here in Ireland." And I said, "Well, we've got a few also in Italy. In fact, there's one making a big noise at this moment. It's the one in Civitavecchia. It got onto the main news, which is watched by 50 million people at the same time in Italy, Rai Uno, prime time in the evening, because," and the reason is this, the bishop wasn't happy about this, and he'd gone on to see what was going on, so he took the image, and what happened? In his very hands, this image of Our Lady of Medjugorje, it had come from Medjugorje, wept blood while he was holding it. So he had no choice but to give testimony before 50 million people, and authorized also the analysis of these tears, and they found something very puzzling. They were real human, not tears, but blood, tears of blood. But this was very puzzling, and everyone in Italy spoke about it afterwards. It was, wait for it, male blood. It was from a male. Now, a few of us were talking about this and were a bit puzzled, but it seemed to be dawning on us that the answer was that Our Lady was weeping precisely because of the abuse of the precious blood with which she is linked, but it's the blood of her son that is malhandled, and in that she is weeping because she feels it every time. Now, that as a backdrop to what happened when Ellen took photos, because with permission we went down to see this miracle in Ireland. It was in County Wicklow, it was in Grange Combe. It was the Lady of the Post, Mary, who had this statue which wept blood and drew a certain amount of attention at the time. People were going to pray. Ellen took 2 photos. In the first, the bloodshot eyes were perfect. You could see just like a human being with tears of blood. She took 2 exactly the same. Neither had a flash, and neither had any means of reflecting the sun or any artificial light. The second one had something which appeared on the negative, and it was very puzzling. It was this, the Sacred Host, which appeared in front of the Immaculate Heart of Our Blessed Lady, and bright and sunny like the presence of the Son of Justice, her own divine Son. And when this was developed, we mentioned it to Mary, who had a statue in the post office there at Grange Combe. And she went to the back and came out with another bigger one, exactly the same miracle, which had happened not long before to someone else. It was a bigger picture, and it was even more well defined, perfectly round, an obvious host in front of the heart. And we were wondering, what's all this about? It was actually the time when Kilnacrot was coming into the headlines, and that was when the Irish Church actually started to become unravelled. It was the beginning of many unfortunate revelations and episodes, and we know now the consequences. And I wasn't yet a priest, and all this was risking putting things in peril as regards my own future. And many things were said by that little miracle, including the fact that probably it was a hint. She was very upset by the abuse of divine grace, especially in the campus of the priesthood. But it was not to deflect me from seeking ordination, even if it meant going to another house or even another country, which is actually what happened. But I stay with this. Our Lady there is weeping for a reason. She's weeping because the precious blood and the flesh for which she is responsible in saying yes to the angel are abused. There is something else. We are also in a situation where we can hurt our Blessed Lady, e.g., the way that we come into the presence of her Divine Son. Every time we come into a place where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, we're coming into the court of heaven, surrounded by angels. Now there are a good few waiting at this moment for this to happen, but when the Lord does come, we can be sure there'll be a myriad angels looking in adoration and prostrate. And then, now, what are we doing? And remember, we are tabernacles for a few minutes after Holy Communion. It's extremely serious if we wound the guest that we have in our heart by thinking, and even more by talking about anything else but him at that point. And that point, as I say, is not just that point. It's a few minutes, and we should not be doing anything else as long as we have the Blessed Sacrament in us. Hence, the secret is to prolong Holy Communion a little bit if the priest is celebrating, have some silence or chant or something before concluding. At least that assures and protects the minimum. But then it depends on the people not to change mode. But every time that one comes into a church where the Blessed Sacrament is, one is coming into a land which belongs to heaven, where the angels have their home. So that's why I've put this in my oratory. As one goes into the chapel, one sees this, and I found it more than once, but I copied it in an oratory in the north of Ireland, and I then had it put in a frame here in Ireland where I am right now. It's just this old poem. I don't know where it comes from. I think it's from England somewhere, but it says it all in a few words, and something to be cultivated as we come into the presence of our God and King. Enter this store as if the floor within were gold, and every wall of jewels all, of wealth untold, as if a choir in robes of fire were singing here. No shout, no rush, but hush, for God is here. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll tell you a story. Some time ago, it was actually in the early 40s, there was a young man who was a Negro in America whose name was Claude Newman. He was eventually brought up by his grandmother for some reason, but the grandmother married another man, and this man very soon began to treat her badly. And this good boy could not take it anymore. He, in his own way, wanted to defend his dear grandmother, which led eventually to his being guilty of the murder, yes, the murder, it would seem, of the man in question. He was eventually caught and put in prison, and indeed sentenced to death. He was in a prison block, and with him were some other four also condemned. And one of them was a lapsed Catholic, but had on him a medal on a string. This Negro was a bit puzzled. What's this about? Oh, take it if you want. I don't want to do it. So he took it, the thing. The other one had no interest whatsoever. So he put it round his neck. And he was sleeping in his prison bed, and he was woken at midnight by what he called the most beautiful lady he had ever seen, who said to him, "Would you like me to be your mother? If you would, ask for a Catholic priest and ask for instruction in faith." Now he was nothing at all, couldn't even read. So, a certain Father O'Leary, the chaplain of the prison, came along and started to give him instruction, along with a few others. I think there were those around him in that prison area who were interested. At a certain point, he started to give a class on confession. And Claude blurted out, "Oh yes, I know about that. If one is going to confession, one talks not to the priest, but as though one were talking to God. And when the priest says, 'I absolve you,' there is flowing over you the blood of Christ, and one is washed completely of anything that one has done." I beg your pardon? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to blurt anything out. Not at all. Where on earth did you pick that up? Oh, the lady told me. The lady? Eventually, the chaplain picked up there was something going on. It was another class. It was time for instruction on the Eucharist. This time, he asked, had the lady said anything to him? Now, in the meantime, he'd been talking with Claude. And Claude had said, "I was told, if the priest at any point shows any doubt about where you're learning these things, you must tell him, in 1940, you, Father, were in a trench in Holland, and you made a vow to the Blessed Virgin that if you survived, you would do something. Now, she is waiting for you to carry that out." I see. By the way, it was to build a church in honour of the Immaculate, and he did after the war in Holland. Now, when it came therefore to instruction on the Blessed Sacrament, he asked, "Did the lady tell you anything about this one?" "Yes. She told me this. In the Blessed Sacrament, you will only see what looks like ordinary bread. But that is really the body and blood, soul and divinity of my Son." When it came to eventually giving Holy Communion to this man, he had an angelic devotion. He was on his knees, he couldn't wait for Jesus to come. Eventually, the sentence was pronounced, or rather the date was given for the execution. The 20th of June, I think it was, 1945, at 5 minutes past midnight. So he was getting ready, and it came to his last Holy Communion. The priest was there on one side of the bars, and the other was on that side. And knelt, and with great devotion, he received Jesus for the last time, knowing that he would soon be seeing him face to face without the veil. It was ticking over towards the moment for applying the electric current. And out of the blue, the sheriff of the prison, a certain Williamson, ran up and shouted, "Reprieve! Reprieve!" Oh, what's that mean? They decided to put it back a fortnight. And what was going on? They were trying to appeal to the highest authority to have it commuted to a life sentence of imprisonment. You didn't know about this. Poor Claude wept, but they thought, well, he's so glad, it's a fortnight left. But no, you don't understand. What's the matter? When you've seen her, you can't want to be one more day on earth. And the chaplain had a brainwave. I know. Now, do you remember, Claude, this nasty prisoner, Jim Hughes, how he hates you? He was a Catholic, but look how he's turned out. Why don't you use every minute you've got left and all your pain now to offer everything for his conversion? Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that. So that's what he did. A fortnight went by. The Attorney General did not accept the appeal, so the current was to be applied. He went to the chair. He was beaming with joy, beaming with ecstasy. He was going to see that beautiful lady again. And in a few minutes, the current had sent him into the beyond, to his Blessed Mother, fortified by the Blessed Sacrament that he adored. Now, a few weeks later, this other one, who was also on death row, Jim, was coming up. It's your turn. Now, come this way. Now, in those days, in the mid-40s, remember, faith was important in the States. And by law, in that state, there had to be a clergyman present at the execution. They tried their best, whatever the faith of the person, to do something sacred before he went into the beyond. And they'd been trying discreetly with this one. And every time that anything was mentioned, he was demonic in his hatred. Nothing. The only hope they had was actually the doctor. He whispered, well, maybe, just say, one, Our Father, the Lord's Prayer just once, and immediately an explosion of hatred, not a question. And even though by law they had to have a clergyman present, the chaplain, Father O'Leary, could not show his collar and had to be completely camouflaged amongst the others, invisible somewhere there. So there he was. He was strapped in to the electric chair. Now, they tried to get him to have some kind of prayer in the electric chair. They pray for him. Immediately, he started to blaspheme in the most demonic way in the electric chair. Suddenly, he stopped talking and screamed. He was looking in one direction. Get me a priest! A priest! So, Father O'Leary came out of the woodwork. Even without his collar, he did what he could. Everyone else had to clear the decks, and he heard his confession in the electric chair. They came back. The sheriff was thoroughly bewildered and bemused. Went up to the chaplain and whispered in his ear, "What made him change?" "No, didn't ask him." "Well, if you don't, I will. I won't sleep a night if I don't." So I went up to him in the electric chair and said in the most gentle voice, "Brother, what made you change?" Do you remember Claude, that Negro, the one I hated so much? He's standing there behind you, and behind him, with arms on each shoulder, is the Blessed Virgin Mary. And he said to me, "Jim, I offered all my pain for your conversion, and the Blessed Virgin has obtained this grace for you. But you would see at this point your place in hell." I have just seen my place in hell, and that's why I scream. Do you know the medal that the other one was wearing? Can you guess? What? Miraculous medal.
Yes.
Our Blessed Lady is big time miracle.